Hapless teenagers beset by demons in the woods. A strange new drug that turns art into murder. A can't beat a deal on a new house with a horrifying past. A video game that might usher in the apocalypse. From the demented mind of Sean C. Baker, author of A Collection of Desires, Shadow Play, and Murder Virus, comes Volume 4, collecting Baker's no-sleep work along with several never-before-published short stories. This 99-cent volume also includes the opening chapter of the author's forthcoming teenage giallo novel, Black Gloves and Broken Hearts, due out later this year.
Hello, welcome to another episode of the Horror Vision Presents Elements of Horror. My name is Sean.
And I'm John, and welcome to the new Dark Ages.
I'm Ray, and yes, indeed, I agree.
Yes, indeed. Fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice. John, this is your pick. What are we going to discuss this evening?
We're going to be discussing Teinosuke Kinugasa's 1926 silent horror masterpiece, A Page of Madness.
Now, for the listeners, this is a flick that when John brought this up, I had never heard of it. I don't know that anybody, if I had to guess, maybe Ray heard of it. Otherwise, I don't think anybody else on the podcast had heard of it.
No, I hadn't. In fact, I looked up some info on it, and just to add to this discussion, like according to the Wikipedia page for it, it was lost for 45 years until it was rediscovered by it's Kanaguchi.
Kinugasa, Teinosuke Kinugasa. It was he discovered it
In his storehouse in 1971.
in his garden shed in 1971, and and just like so many films, because up until this point, he had made 34 films before he made Page of Madness. He would go on to do at least about 30 or 50 more, including a film called Gates of Hell, which won big at both the Cannes Film Festival and the Oscars. But this one is a true gem, and it was thought to have been lost for many years, just like so many films from the silent era. Like over 80% of films from the silent era are lost forever. Poor, careless storage, natural disasters, earthquakes, fires, man-made disasters like bombings during World War II. And so it's
Improper storage, probably as well.
yeah. So it's really, really important, like when nitrate film stock is preserved properly and when things are rediscovered. And there's so many instances where you have silent films that are partially recovered and people have to sort of piece together. This film is fully recovered, but here's the catch. And you can watch this film in its entirety on YouTube, but there are no intertitles like you would find in American silent films, like such as Charlie Chaplin films. And there was a very specific reason for that because, as we know, silent films were not completely silent. They had musical accompaniment, but in a lot of places, they would have a narrator. And in Places like, say, Latin America, for example, they had what was called the explicador, or the one who explains, and this would be a person who would stand off to the side and narrate the thing. In the United States, you had people narrating films for audiences and kind of plugging in their own thing. In Japan, you had what was known as a benshi. In Japanese, that's the one who explains. And
Mm.
this was a very special narrator. They wouldn't tell you, they wouldn't explain the plot to you. The images should do that. What they would do rather is provide what was known as kagezurifu, which means shadow narration. They would narrate the elements of the story that are between the lines, the gray areas, and um, provide kind of a sort of an intellectual commentary on what you were seeing. And this was such a popular profession in Japan during the 1920s. Movie theater marquees would list the name of the benshi first, then the name of the film, then the director. It was that popular.
Wow.
Akira Kurosawa's older brother, who introduced him to cinema and got him really sparked his love for cinema. Hideo Kurosawa was a benshi, and so many other filmmakers that became famous in Japan during the golden era started out their career in benshi cinema. And A Page of Madness was no exception. When you watch it, it's clear that it was designed for a benshi. So and it's not a struggle. The story is pretty easy to grasp, and even without doing some rudimentary research. But there are definitely a lot of elements where when you're watching it, you have to serve as your own benshi and really kind of project yourself and give your own shadow narration to what's taking place on screen. And this was something that was so popular that even during the 1930s, when sound became a part of film elsewhere, Japan continued the benshi tradition like all the way up until like the mid to late 1930s.
Wow. No kidding.
Have you ever seen this with a Benji there, John? Because I'm curious now.
No, I've seen a film. The only film I've ever seen with a benshi is a film called Orochi, which means the serpent. It is a Jidaigeki film or period drama about a wandering samurai that becomes a thief. And it's from, I think, also from 1926 or 1925. But yeah, this is like there's a lot of things on my bucket list to experience cinematically. And watching Page of Madness, which I have seen on the big screen with musical accompaniment, but to see it with the benshi, or or I guess is kind of this new sort of form of benchiism called a neo benshi, I think would be a real treat. It would definitely be on my bucket list.
I would be very interested to see it that way too.
Yeah, so would I. I text the group earlier today. I watched this last night. Last night was a tumultuous night. So I got off work. It's been a long time since I've watched something like this. And I had just seen like the first minute or two, and I'm like, okay, here's what I'm gonna do. I never do this anymore. I got off work, I told Kirsten, I'm like, hey, I'm gonna eat after I watch this movie. I sealed up my office, I got baked, killed all the lights, threw on the movie, and holy fuck, did it. I mean, I was just from the minute it started, sucked right the fuck in. However,
It's hypnotic, isn't it?
it is hypnotic, but I lost, like, there was a large part of the narrative that just fucking just spilled out over the edges of my eyes as I watched. I mean, the first like 9 minutes is, imagery. It's the dancing and the rain and the bars and there's just, so I almost watched it like the way, in thinking about it today, I thought about, and it's a shitty example, and I don't mean to take anything away from the movie at all by saying this, but like, I was in high school in the 90s, like you get high and put on like Beyond the Mind's Eye. It was just like random like computer animation bullshit, for stoners essentially. But I kind of watched it like that because I was just so overblown by what I was seeing in this state of mind. But the music, holy Jesus. And so I'm like, wait a minute. I did no research going in. So I'm like, this music is incredible. And I'm thinking it's like original, right? And then at some point, like three-quarters of the way through the movie, there's a synth in it that sounds exactly like um one of the songs off The Cure's Pornography. I'm like, oh, okay, wait a minute, this is totally added after the fact. And then at the end of the YouTube link that I watched it on that you had said, it said music 2016, the Alloy Orchestra.
Yeah, that's the most common musical accompaniment.
Okay.
There are there are other live performances by other groups. One in particular that uses metallic instruments and dry ice to create sound. Um, One group that I really love, they're from Texas or from Austin. It's a group called the Invincible Czars,
Okay.
and they do musical accompaniments to a traveling musical tour of Nosferatu and the Cabinet of Dr. Caligari, and I know there's I know there's a new one that they're trying to put together right now, but I forget what it is. I think they should do Page of Madness because Page of Madness is it is the Japanese Caligari, but here's the catch. They didn't have an expressionist tradition in Japan. Uh, they they many people had seen Caligari. I don't, to my knowledge, I do not think Kinugasa saw Caligari ever, but it's something he totally would have eaten up
Hmm.
because he was part of this um, surrealist art movement, this art commune called Jun Ego Ungo, which means the pure cinema movement. And it was basically just a movement away from, because there were a lot of films in Japan at the time that were social realism. Like social realism was kind of a big thing uh, in Japan at the time, and like melodramas, that or Jidaigeki films or samurai films. And he was like, and so he was part of this art movement. It was like, no, I want to do something different. And as a result, you pretty much have the first J-horror film. Like, I'm sure you both have noticed throughout the film, like the well, you have a woman with the dark hair in front of her face that brings Ringu to mind.
Yes.
Like, I would be really shocked if Ringu wasn't inspired by this film in some ways.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, and the use of the mask, and I mean, there's a few different things in here that like clearly I've seen in J horror since then.
Yeah, so I was wondering about the mute. Like, is this like I wasn't sure if this was like a less pure version because it had a more modern company, but I would love to have that soundtrack on on vinyl or whatever, just to listen to it. I just thought it was absolutely unbelievable. And I don't know what it would be like without that, but I would love to hear it with other music as well, especially live. That's just fucking fantastic. So I feel like the element of horror here and the story I had to like, and usually I don't read anything. I never, if we're gonna do one of these, I don't look a movie up as far as like read other people's reviews or whatever um before we do them. But this, I was just looking up some random stuff about the movie and then kind of fell into, I wanted to kind of just dabble in what uh Wikipedia had to say about the plot because my only takeaway was contagious madness. And I don't even know if I was correct, but that was all that and then at the end, I was like, wait a minute, did we just have like a fucking like Christopher Nolan moment at the end where he like goes back to, I'm like, was there like were we following the wrong person? Or did we think
Oh,
we
I
were
got you.
following one person when we were following the other? Like who was actually in the asylum? And then so I read a little bit about the plot. Um, but I don't know, like, what did you guys, talk to me about the actual story? And the horror element is just madness. I mean, I just feel like it's a very raw approach to portraying madness. And it's fairly startling.
Yeah, the plot in a nutshell is you got this guy who was he was in the Navy, and they're not clear what his involvement in the Navy was. From what I gather, he might have been in the Navy in what was the Russo-Japanese War, which was like a 1905 to like 1908, roughly. This is as it suggests, it was a war between Japan and Russia, and it was really the first war where they asserted themselves as a superpower. And Japan, during the 1920s and afterward, was rising as a superpower and slowly started to become, just as Germany was at the time, um, slowly assembling as a fascist state that it would become later in the 1930s. And this sailor from the Navy, he uh, is a cruel man, and his cruelty towards his wife drives her insane, and she ends up in a psychiatric hospital, in a mental institution outside of Tokyo. And he feels so guilt-ridden for this that he takes a job as a janitor in the mental institution so he can always be close to his wife and keep an eye on her and maybe get her better and get her out of there somehow. And that's where we enter the story. But it's not that draws us into the story. It's, Sean, what you were talking about, just like this pure imagery of madness. We're being sucked into a dream. We're in somebody's the there's this girl who's dancing about. She's one of the patients who's dancing and twirling about, and in many ways, it's like she's this sort of hypnotic device that mesmerizes the audience and draws us in. It's like we're being from very early on. It's signaling you're being drawn more into a state of mind than you are into a traditional cinematic world. And it's like we're so used to that being accomplished by like these double exposed images and images at like these canted angles or Dutch angles and um, rain. I'm thinking of the opening of Suspiria, the Dario Argento version of
Yeah, oh
Suspiria, when
yeah.
Susie Bannion is being driven in the taxi, and we're getting he's cutting to these close shots of rain water just pouring into these storm drains. And it's very, very similar to what's going on in Page of Madness, like where the image is exists for the image's sake, and you're being it's speaking to you in a language of film that is both strange and familiar.
Yep. Ray?
I really enjoyed the use of double imagery in the film. Uh, I at first thought the dancer was one of the main characters, but then I realized, like, I think John put it best that like she's luring you in, but we also have that scene later on where like the men are watching her dance, and it
Mm-hmm.
almost seems to intensify their madness. That like I don't know, it's almost like she's like a siren that like is almost a method of spreading and delivering madness.
Well,
Like
is she the personification of madness?
I
That's
think so.
that's kind of how I took that because when they're watching her, I was like, oh, that's where I got the kind of contagious madness thing. Anyway, I just throw that out there. Continue. Sorry.
No, I don't think you're wrong because I mean later on when like he like when the main I guess you can call him main character, the janitor, the Navy man, he when he attempts to I guess break his wife out of the asylum, that like it you start to know like it's not only just the imagery of what he's seeing and how he's portrayed, but you're also seeing the actions he's taking, which maybe he's actually taking, or maybe it's just some dark fantasy of his. But it does feel like we're watching him descend into madness. Like he, she was driven there by his cruel treatment, and now he is driven there by his own guilt, by his own mind, like in his own guilt, reflecting back on him, and he just is trying to resolve it in some way, and he can't. Like it's just there's no way to. But I mean, it's very impressive. I love the use of double layering to. Um, it feels like it's a way of signaling our departure from like the real world into what madness is when we see it, because it is selected at points. I love the one image I love was the towards the end was when he's kind of trying to get the wife out of the asylum and
Mhm.
it's failing, and he's just manic, and you literally have the wheel spinning, and I'm like, wow, that's the most blatant image of someone spinning their wheels I've ever seen. It's so impressive. I was like, I was like, I love this. This is so neat.
I mean, I would say that as we're explaining this, this isn't a film where I would say no spoilers, because this is not a film
No,
you can spoil, because
I
No.
don't think so.
there's nothing that hinges on plot. Like I mean maybe, because we do get because we do get like this one segment in the middle of the film where we go inside his mind, and he's thinking about a different kind of future, like an alternative world where he wins the lottery, and
Mhm.
there's a
Yeah.
a military parade in his honor, when he comes back from the war.
No, you definitely can't spoil this. And I mean, I would say, I think people, so you know, you remember a couple years ago, I feel like was constantly seeing people talk about this old, I don't remember the specifics. There's an old black and white flick. I don't even think it's that long, called Begotten,
Hmm.
where it's like supposed to be God killing himself or something like that. Um,
Yes,
Yeah.
that's begotten.
so anyone that was I feel like a lot of people were really interested in that. I feel like definitely, I mean, this would transcend that audience, but just saying, like, if you were into that, I think you should give this a shot. It's readily available on YouTube, and I think you should just go in knowing, like, hey, there's no title cards, and but really, I mean, in some way, and I feel a little bit vindicated. Like, I kind of felt like I had been so high that I was like, oh, I kind of fucked this up, because like I'm not even going to understand what the fuck I just saw. But it didn't matter, because I experienced it
No.
as pure cinema. And then now hearing you say he was part of a pure cinema movement, I'm like, well, okay, then I'm sure he would have been like, thumbs up, kid, you did okay, you know?
I feel like it's more of an experience.
Yeah, I don't think you need it, because it's specifically designed, which leads me to believe that the benshi, because not all benshis were alike. This is like why the benshi was, people would go to the cinema to see their favorite benshi more
Hmm.
back then, more than to see
The
uh
movie.
the film itself. And so each benshi had a different style, but this one was more of an experimental type of benshi that was very much into kind of bodily and exaggerated movements,
Mm.
like
Hmm.
where it was everything was like almost like this sort of exaggerated pantomime and reaction to things. So, and remember, you wouldn't have the benchi saying, okay, this character is the janitor and he
Right.
is this and this and that. That's totally not how it works.
Yeah. So I think in not having that, not having title cards, I think you can just go into this and just experience it as a pure cinematic experience. And it was something else, man. It's one of my, like I said, one of my favorite viewings of the year. I just was, maybe it's just because I don't get to curate my experience like I describe. I mean, it's how I used to watch every movie. if it was just a regimented routine. And it's so rare these days. But I was like, I don't want to try to watch this in pieces or anything like that, and I'm like, I don't want to watch it too late because chances are I'll fall asleep, stuff like that. Because, fuck, man. I mean, it's just harder to stay awake late a lot of times. So,
Yeah.
um,
I've been finding myself less and less able to do that, especially now that I'm a dad. It's like
yeah. Oh, well, yeah.
in the early days of after my son was born, it's like I used to do that because I'd be constantly up,
Right.
at night, and then it's like it seemed like there were only one other period in my life when I would do that. It would be like college in the few years after that, early 20s, just like movie marathon until 6 in the morning, and then like, sleep until, 2 o'clock in the afternoon. It's like, yeah, no, nowadays it's like I'm lucky if, I can make it up to, you know, past 1 o'clock.
But yeah, I think you're right, Sean. I think this is I don't think this is something you can spoil. It's very experiential. It's John mentioned, and it's a good mention because I think it's another film that I don't think you can spoil the ending. Knowing it going in is the cabinet after Caligari. It's amazing. Like you just have to watch it and see the visuals, and it's got more of a straightforward plot and there is a twist, but I don't think going in like knowing the twist it would still ruin it for you because you still sit there watching it and you're like, wow, this is neat and so informed a style of its own after. And I, there's other things that are like that. I think you could, you can tell somebody the whole plot and give them a whole idea of what Eraserhead is about. But until they sit down and watch it, they don't know shit. And once
Yeah.
they
No.
watch it, they're like, wow, what the hell? And I think anyone could listen to this and be like, oh, I think I know what this is about now. And then watch this and be like, whoa, I didn't, whoa, they didn't see that. Or like, I didn't catch that. That's crazy. Like, it's something you have to experience on your own. Like, it's not something that can be ruined. Like,
Yeah.
there's so few films that are like that, but like there are ones that are just like you can tell somebody the complete plot and they'll still like see it and be like, Jesus Christ, what was that I just watched? Like
Well, it's an
I just
experience,
that's
not a
crazy.
narrative.
There's
Yeah,
only
That's
exactly.
the difference.
there's only one exception, and that is towards the end when he's trying to get his wife out of there, and when there's a riot going on in the asylum, and how she's hesitant, and that chain of events. I mean, that getting into detail that would be probably in my mind the only spoiler, quote unquote, that you
Yeah.
can get into, because I think like some of the reasons why I think lend that you would experience, I think lend itself to the more broadly speaking ideas about, the descent into madness and what the film has to say about collective madness and collective insanity.
Hmm.
Yeah,
You know,
absolutely.
I was thinking earlier today, I was like, wow, this film could not be more apropos, and I totally did not intend it that way.
Yeah. Well played, sir.
Very well played.
And
Very
I
well
and
played.
I wish to God that wasn't the case.
Yeah,
Mm-mm,
well,
don't we all? Don't we all? But hey, as I, texted Ivy Tolan earlier today, like I still communicate with her. She actually reached out last night, just checking in to see how I was doing. And I was like, these are the times where when people ask me, how can I like horror movies and like, aren't they scary? I look and say, sure, they might be scary, but I'd rather deal with a demon mind clown than for 90 minutes and it's over. It's done. like reality is so much more terrifying than,
Yeah.
than the horror
Well,
movies. Come on.
people ask me all the time. It's like, why horror? And why do you choose to watch horror? And sometimes I give them the Stephen King response, and I say, like, why do you assume that I have a choice? And other times, I give them the more realistic answer, which is like, yeah, I mean, it's like, it's a question. It's like, why would people be drawn to stuff that they know is disturbing? And I think this film, Page of Madness, answers that. It's you need to know, you need to discover, you need
Yes.
to, you're you're Cain in the egg chamber, and you need to look into the, face hugger egg, even though there's going to be something bad in there. You need to know what's behind there. It's like, why? And the janitor's like, well, why don't I just cut my losses and get out of here? Why do I need to go further? And yet he does. And in that, you discover something about yourself, and you discover something about society. So it's the whole process of discovery that is leads us leads people back into horror again and again and again, myself included. And I think the 1920s, they, as one of the first J-horror films, one of the earliest horror films in general, this film plays on that idea.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That very well said. I think that like
Very.
that's one of those things too, where like when people ask me about horror, I say like, well, it's honestly one of the most exciting genres of film out there that I've run into in years. Like, there's so many like genres out there that like are redoing the same thing, but like, I mean, and I've cited things to people. I'm like, I've seen things that are like really thought provoking, really interesting, like Censor or like Saint Maud or um I'm trying to come up with some other names, but like things like that, where it's like it's a question of humanity and guilt and madness and all of these things that we experience, and they're the dark things that we experience, and that we shy away from looking at them instead of looking at them face on and dealing with them and the consequences of turning away from them. Like you're right. Like looking down at that egg, like you could walk away, but if you walk away, you don't know, and you've never confronted what's there in that darkness. And
Yeah.
horror movies do that. They ask that question and then pursue it to its end. And it's not always something easy to watch or deal with, but you know, like Martyrs, I think it's important. Like
Yeah.
those
Yeah.
are important things to deal with. Like, you know, they're not easy
Exactly.
things to watch always, but hey, if you don't ever confront it, what are you doing?
It's strange because a lot of people, they find the genre cold. And I'm like, no, horror is not cold. Ernest Hemingway novels are cold. This, horror I don't think is cold. It's just that the emotions are so extreme that, I think
Yes.
there are some people who experience that as cold.
Oh, well said. That's really interesting.
Yeah,
Horror asks the big questions. I mean,
I think it does too.
so does some sci-fi, and I mean, I'm
Yeah.
not saying a Western can't or whatever, but I feel like perpetually, not all horror, but a lot of horror asks big questions. Sometimes they do it in
Yeah.
goofy ways, and sometimes they do it in extremely profound ways. So,
Well, I mean, shit, horror. I mean, there's been horror westerns, and I've seen ones that have asked profound questions like this. What
Or
is it, The
like Bone
Wind?
Tomahawk.
Oh, fuck, that's a good one too. Oh, that's such a good one too, man.
the
That's
the
a good call.
Wind, that's interesting. I just earmarked that to rewatch. I forget what I stumbled. That's on maybe Prime or something right now. It's on
Yeah, the
something with a
one where
different
the
thumbnail.
wife
I was like, oh,
is, yeah, the wife out in the West, and keeps questioning her husband about why we settled here, and oh my God, it is just a study in loneliness and distance, and uh what
Yeah,
those
it's a good
things do
flick.
to the human animal. And like, man, it's a great film.
Speaking of wind, I mean, in Page of Madness, it's like this is like, the elements are like so at play. It's like, when
Yes.
people think of when people think of, Kurosawa's samurai films, they think of rain, and they think of like or they see something like Kobayashi's Harakiri, the fight in the cemetery and up on the hillside. It's like the wind blowing tall grass everywhere, and this is a film that like really, really understands the elements, draws heavily on Japanese art and really some of those traditions in theater, and bringing the elements to life.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
I want to get your opinion on uh the significance of the no theater masks at the end of the film. If you have any thoughts
Oh,
on
I
that.
think I read it as because I was obsessed with this, like, because I think at some point way previous to that, I think there's a couple points where like the bars either disappear or people move through the bars or so I
yeah.
was really obsessed with this idea of like who's really mad, how contagious is this, what is it saying about madness in society? So I felt like that was a way to kind of say like, see, these these people could be anybody that you know.
Mm,
I that's a good analysis. I mean, the thing that struck me was that they their behaviors all changed once they put on the mask, once he puts the mask on them. They seem more composed. And maybe just in addition to that, the concept that like you're the question of your sanity is only as far as the image that you portray. Because once they have those masks on, then they don't look like crazy people, and therefore they don't act like crazy people. At least in how he imagines it. Uh, and maybe that's a little read into him too, is that he believes that by just changing surface things about himself, about what happened, and that he can rectify the past, and clearly that's not the case.
What do you think, John?
yeah, I like both of those analysis. I like I've always sort of taken it as the idea that we're it's like society wants to get people to conform and to fall into certain category, and the no masks become a way of, not everyone becoming anonymous and, joining together ironically in a statement uh against conformity. And so it's almost kind of asking, it's like, okay, well, who are really the sane people here?
Mm-hmm.
We're like, and you look at it like when you look at what these artists were looking at. Japan fought most of the world 10 years later, and in its arrogance killed millions. So this
Wow.
and filmmakers, like, as if in horror of all that, made deeply humanistic films. Like Yasujiro Ozu would, for example, would do things about make films about, quiet domestic life. And Kinugasa would make very, very theatrical and macabre stories, like even beyond the war, and reflection, he would do stuff like that, like at literary adaptations. So this is like really kind of like a reflection of society and social madness, and looking at people engaging in kind of the same collective madness that Robert Veen in with Cabinet of Caligari saw, with his allegory of like the mental institution there. It's like everyone in World War One and that fallout and that trauma was this other form of collective madness.
Hmm.
And then in the masks is just sort of symbolizing people wanting to stand out from that and just sort of saying like in a way like no, you can't take over my autonomy.
Final thoughts. I kind of feel
Yeah,
like we probably said everything, right? I mean,
yeah.
Yeah, everyone see this
Go
film.
see
It's
it. Yeah,
it's so easy to watch. I would say,
it's on YouTube
Sh
for God's sakes. You can see the
yeah,
whole thing.
Sean, I think is a model for the best way to view this film, like on a big screen. On YouTube. Don't watch it on your laptop. Screen it through a big screen,
hmm
start to finish. Um, Baked is optional, but I definitely applaud that involvement and that form of engagement. And go into it. You can go into it fresh, but also do go into it knowing that you are one going to uh, experience something that is not going to offer you an easy explanation. It's not
Yes.
ungraspable.
no,
This is not that cryptic. Don't worry about that. It's like Eraserhead is far more cryptic than this film.
Yes. Absolutely.
You should do fine. Like maybe read the plot on Wikipedia if you must, but uh, I don't think you would have to do that.
no.
And yeah, second, just think about, just surrender yourself to the storytelling and just know that you are entering a mindscape where it's images for the image's sake, and
Oh, I love that.
it's
I
something
love
different.
I love that. Know that you are
Yeah.
entering a mindscape.
Pay attention to the images and trust your gut on them. Like, again, it is a mindscape. But if you're watching and like you feel like, I feel like this is what this is saying, like your intuition's probably good.
Yeah.
There's stuff in there where I was like, oh, is that that means? And like, is it kept in like, the film will also guide you too as you're watching. Like, if you're questioning, like, is that what that means? Like, you'll arrive at a moment where the film will either cement it for you or go, no, this is what it means. And you'll go, oh, I see now. Okay, got it. Got it. Because there was like moments there with like the three crazy guys and him interacting with them where I was questioning what was happening with them. And then I got to this moment where I went, no, I get it now. Okay,
hmm
cool, cool. It just took a moment. It took like beats to get to it, but the film helps itself. Like as you're going, like it does explain itself, and it does, if you pay attention, does give you explanation as it goes.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, that's a page of madness, and this is Elements of Horror, and I'm Sean.
In solidarity, friendship, and love, I'm John.
I'm Ray. Stay strong out there.